at Miramar College in San Diego and has a master's from Cal State San Marcos in history. And he's chair trustee of the engagement committee of Forever Balboa Park, the nonprofit partner with the city of San Diego for Balboa Park. And he's the prior chair of the board of the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum. And so at this point, we want to welcome Dr. Ho, and we're anxious to hear his talk. Dr. Ho?
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Stein, for that kind introduction. Thank you, Dr. Cheng, also for introducing me. And I also wanted to thank the staff and administrators of the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum, as well as the SDSU for hosting today's talk. So as we kind of get underway, I'll go ahead and start sharing screen, and you let me know if this works well, and we'll go from there. All right. Perfect. So it is a pleasure to be here today. And lastly, of course, last but not least, I want to thank all of you for being here today. And I'm looking forward to your questions and comments, and especially to Professor Michael Yee's comments in the Q&A after my talk. So today I'll be speaking a little bit about the types of detective work that go into creating history using a wide variety of material, specifically visual archives, oral histories, and family memories. Now, you may be thinking about histories and materials of your own, and I'm glad that you're doing so. You know, we are all historians here, and we all have fragments of history and experience in our own types of places in the world that are part of what we do to create our own types of history. So even though today the majority of my talk will be situated in trans-Pacific experiences and experiences in modern China, these types of approaches and materials and experiences are applicable to really all of modern East Asia, as well as Chinese American experiences. Many of us here, including myself, are Chinese Americans, and we may want to think about how we can project and apply some of these ideas and approaches to those other global experiences as well. So to give a kind of start off to my context and where I'm starting from, I am the first a co-editor and an author of two books, first War and Occupation in China, and second Developing Mission, that Dr. Stein mentioned a little bit earlier in the introduction. And today I'll be focusing more on the types of historical material and detective work that really undergirded and exist behind the curtain of my most recent book, Developing Mission. There is a QR code on the screen if any of you have your phones nearby and want to scan it to get a link that takes you to the book itself. And I look forward, of course, to hearing your thoughts and questions as the talk progresses. And this particular slide will also show up at the end of the talk as well. But the thing with talks and the thing with historical books and materials that you've probably been all aware of and see is that typically what you're seeing is the finished product. You see a book, you watch a documentary, you walk into a museum exhibit, and you are already seeing the final finished product of what is really an entire set of experiences and ways of thinking that is not often visible to the public or to most readers or even to most scholars. So today I'll be drawing back the curtain a little bit on what it means to put together different types of material, visual, oral, memory, in creating a multicultural and trans-Pacific type of history that, again, is hopefully applicable to both modern Chinese history, modern East Asian history, and also Chinese American experience. And some of those experiences in pulling back the curtain and creating these materials and doing that detective work often take place in archives. And I love to think about that, you know, we are all familiar with Indiana Jones. That's not the way history is done, but there's a type of adventure and exploration aspect of jumping into an archive and digging up material that may or may not have been seen by other people for decades, if not centuries, whether that material is film, in the case of this particular archive, or whether that material exists in different types of institutions, like in this case, the Yale Divinity School in New Haven, affiliated with Yale University, or material that exists in attics, basements, closets, garages, living rooms of private families, perhaps families like yours. And certainly, again, as I kind of speak through today's topics, think about material that you have in your own families. And I want to embrace the fact that both the mission of the Chinese Historical Museum in San Diego, as well as my own research, is about bridging worlds. And I like how the museum does a wonderful job of not just focusing on the history of China and Asia, or not just on the history of Chinese Americans or Asian American Pacific Islander experience, but it bridges those worlds. And as we think about those different bridging of worlds, I'd like you to keep in mind two particular words. First, the word in-betweenness. What does it mean to exist between worlds, to have material that may bridge experiences, countries, time, and space? That's the first word, in-betweenness. And the second word is the word mediation, that when we have these materials, what do they do to mediate historical experience, both yours and mine, as well as scholars and community members, mediation and experience, and materials from institutional archives, from private families, from all sorts of contexts. All these materials are part of this global and very human experience. In terms of surprises, and you may have surprises and stories in your own family, having material or looking at material and thinking about what it means to have your family history and your own historical interests mapping onto histories in the world. I just want to draw a couple of examples of surprises that I have found that kind of didn't make it into the book or never made it into my research, but stand out as this example of how history is a fabric of all sorts of different experiences and materials in ways that stand out, both in how we see them as historians, but also how we see them as human beings. The example I'm going to give now is that living room table you just saw, pulling out these materials which belong to an American missionary, medical missionary family based in Shandong in the 1930s. I was able to pull out these photographs and these typed up manuscripts and letters and diaries and all of these personal materials, and then realized as I was looking at this particular photograph that there was something in the same room that I was sitting in that looked oddly familiar. And it was that clock that happened to appear both in a family photograph taken in China in the 1940s, as well as in the research space that I was now occupying in the 2010s. And I like to call this the time traveling clock because it appears in both of these images, as well as in the family experience, in my experience, and the surprising types of things you don't expect when you come up with the opportunity to work with these types of historical experiences and materials. Other surprises that kind of exist behind the curtain of research in our field may include finding letters held together with very deadly nails. Apparently, this family, creating letters from China in the 1930s, ended up binding all of their letters with nails that later became very rusty. And I'm pretty sure Dr. Stein can tell you about the dangers of tetanus. And tetanus is something you don't want to meet when you are doing archival research. And yet, surprising experiences in finding letters held together with nails, or finding photographs that have nothing to do with my particular research, but depicting a human experience in a way that perhaps us of the 21st century might also recognize. This is a bachelor party of a group of American young people in January of 1899. A photograph taken with flash powder. And if you look closely at the expressions of these young people in January of 1899, I feel like they would be very, very comfortable if they had Instagram and iPhones in their time period, clearly having a very good time in this particular setting, which again is a surprising type of research experience that may or may not fit in what you're looking at, and yet has this human connection across time in that perhaps I might recognize a party like that in 2024. Different dress, different perhaps people, but similar expressions. And if they had iPhones, they would be documenting and posting this on TikTok, I'm pretty sure. That being said, I want to jump in today to look at all those bits and pieces of what it means to think about in-betweenness. What does it mean to think about materials and stories, histories, and memories that mediate across time, across space, and tell us something about what it means to think about transnational experience in Sino-US contact in modern China through image making. And everything I talked about so far, the surprises, the methods, the ideas, let's think about them as we move through the remainder of today's talk. And this is the bringing us closer to what the final product looks like and the stories that go with it. The ideas that I love to think about, and I would hope that we would also share in thinking about today, also exist and coexist in these particular themes that I was looking at as part of my work in both East Asia and also later on Chinese American experience, that we may want to think about vernacular or so-called amateur photography or filmmaking by people in the 20th century, and specifically for my work, Americans and Chinese individuals, as ways of mediating transnational modernities. So what it means to think about your place in the world, what it means to make images of these types of modernity, and those images, both photos and film, as well as the experiences of the people themselves, are a kind of in-betweenness, that they connect people, they mediate, they are always linked to local perceptions as well as broader ideas, whether ideas about religion or culture or international contact, that these types of materials and these experiences are in-betweenness. And they mediate by doing specific things. These visual technologies and materials are always embodying historical meanings. They don't stay in one place or one time. They go through space and time, and they have diverse afterlives. And I want to think about this mediation as another example. Literally right now, as you sit in front of your screen, listening to me talk, what we're doing right now is an experience that is mediated by an entire network of technology, visual technologies, your device, my device, the entire network of the internet. And I love to think about the signal shooting from my computer into the stratosphere to some satellite, bouncing off and coming into your computer. That's probably not how it works, but those technologies embody a type of mediation. And as we sit here this morning or this afternoon or this evening, wherever you may be, you are involved in a technological mediation that is itself part of an experience. And for this work for today, I want to talk about how private and also semi-private images represent so-called ground-level experiences of what Americans and Chinese communities during these major changes in history are thinking about and experiencing and really living out as part of their religious life, political life, and cross-cultural encounters. So these are the themes behind my book and also behind the topics I'll be covering today. And just to kind of give a cast of characters, just to draw where we are talking about, who we're talking about really in this experience, excuse me, we have a number of people that are involved in these types of mediations and these materials. First, we have Dr. Harold Henke and Jessie May Henke, who are American Presbyterian medical missionaries in the province of Hebei in China, North China, for about 20 years, 1927 to 1949. They have three children, Robert Henke, Richard Henke, and Lois Henke. And they meet and work with particular Chinese people, of whom we have two examples. Liu Zhu, a nurse at Daoji Yuan in Beijing. Also, she worked in Tianjin and Wuhan. And also Dr. Li Qinghai, a professor of surveying who ends up working at Tsinghua University and Wuhan University. But these are just people's names to keep in mind. What they really have to say, what they have to do with, is that type of mediation that I talked about earlier, the in-betweenness and mediation. And to bring in a little bit for those scholars out there and those of you who are thinking about what it means that this person is talking about, and what does this mean metaphysically? What does this even mean as a type of connection to larger human experience? I like to come back to these two particular quotes from a book written by a wonderful semiotician, French philosopher named Roland Barthes. And in this book, Camera Lucida, he writes about the ways that photos have a intellectual as well as a emotional impact on what we think of as experience. And one thing I keep coming back to in all of my work, and perhaps you, all of you, have had experiences in working or looking at images of your own personal images, documentary images, is this idea that the photograph doesn't just say what doesn't exist anymore, doesn't not necessarily say what is no longer, but it definitely says what has been. That there was something there. There was an emanation of a past reality that's captured in photographs and also to a certain extent in film made by people across time and space. And Roland Barthes writes about this experience not just as, a kind of theoretical exercise, but he talks about it like it's a magic. That every time you see a photograph, every time you think about a photo or an image that has a personal meaning or has a historical meaning, that photograph or that image possesses an evidential force, that it has a testimony in that force, and it bears not just on the object, not just on the thing that's in the photo, not just on you, but it bears an impact on time. That every photograph is a has-been. Every photograph, every image is a slice of time that has all of these tendrils or all of these trajectories extending from it that say something about what that photo is for experience. All right, that's enough theory for right now. Let's switch over to what this story has to say about all of these things. First of all, to get into the 20th century and the images that I'm looking at today, we have to understand that there are particular technologies that created and also shaped the ways that these images pass through time. And just like in 400 years, a scholar or a group of students will not understand how Zoom or how TikTok or how Facebook works unless they understand how iPhones work. They will have to understand the technology in order to understand the culture and the community and the tensions that go with that particular experience. In the same way, we have to understand that in the mid 20th century and the 50 years of the first half of the 20th century, there are particular technologies that are mediating these experiences in China, across the Pacific, in the United States, and elsewhere. And those technologies are smaller and smaller mobile cameras. Cameras like the one I'm holding up right now in my camera that you can kind of see here on screen. I'm going to open this really quickly. Here we go. This particular experience is framed by small devices, small cameras that are really in some ways only as big as what we would see as an iPhone today. So there are mobile cameras that are making people's experiences and shaping them in a certain way that we have to think about when it comes to the mediation in this history. Small cameras mean different ways of thinking about the world and about your place in the world. And that is what the Hankies bring to China. A young couple in the fall of 1927, Harold Henke, a newly minted doctor, Jessie May Henke, a newly minted nurse, travel from the Midwest, from Illinois and Indiana to China. And they take with them a small camera, a compact camera, that will then shape the way they see China and the way that we will see their experiences in China for years to come. As their ship pulls up to the dock in Tianjin for the first time in the fall of 1927, they take out that camera, they unfold it. You probably saw me unfolding that camera earlier. I can just show it to you one more time, what that looks like to actually take this camera out of your pocket, pop the button open, unfold the camera, and take in a fraction of a second an image of their first view of China, the port of Tianjin as that they're pulling in on their ship, seeing China for the first time, and perhaps thinking about what it will mean to become part of China. And these missionaries in the 1920s and 1930s are thinking about themselves in very global ways. I want you to fight the stereotype of what you think of as a missionary, as a kind of person who comes from a place, brings a religion, and just kind of imposes it on people. That's not the way these people are thinking. The Hankies are thinking about themselves in terms of global citizenship. And they will soon call China the land of our adoption, that China will adopt us as well as us adopting it. And that camera will allow them to enter the spaces and go with them as they travel through and become part of China in the 1920s through the 1930s. That small camera will go with the hankies as they go through and conduct their language training. And many of you who have ever taken Chinese as a second language or speak a second language or a third or a fourth language yourself, you will know what the experience is like of learning that new language or using a language in a foreign space for the first time. And it involves a lot of negotiation. It involves walking around the streets. It involves testing out your poor Mandarin and practicing with some level of embarrassment, perhaps, your way of communicating with others. And that camera, that small camera that the Hankies bring to China, will go with them on the streets of Beijing in 1927, 1928, as they take almost a year and a half of language training at the College of Chinese Studies in Beijing. And you want to think about just what it means to have this small camera and to navigate the space of a new country using a new language. And by the time the Hankies leave China in 1949, both of them will be fluent in Mandarin. They will be reading and writing and thinking in Mandarin. But in 1927, they are walking the streets of Beijing, thinking about what it means to be living in this city, communicating with others. And you see this in the images. And again, think about your own images where you have photos that connect to space and imagination and where you are in a place. For example, this particular photograph, and it's marked with PO on the right-hand side, has an entire set of notations on the back, which tells you how to go places based on where this photograph is taken. This photo was taken at these cross streets 2.5 blocks from where we are living, and it's called Shi Pai Lou. He's translating Chinese in romanization here. Dr. Henke is. You can see these things. Our post office, which they use to mail this photo back to the United States, is on the right-hand side. They're also talking about social structure. There are policemen here. There are soldiers here. There are men and ladies in rickshaws. This is an entire set of navigating a space that is coalescing, that is focused on making a photograph. And yet, not just the photograph, but placing yourself, embedding yourself in a new space, in a new culture. And this is a navigation of space, place, identity, and language that is all possible and materialized because it's connected to photography. That camera, that experience, the learning of Chinese will go with the Hankies as they start their 20-year mission in China. They will soon be sent to a mission hospital run by the American Presbyterian Church in North China in a place called Xingtai. At the time, it was called Shunde. And they will take that camera into the space of medical practice, whether it is surgeries or vaccination clinics, or taking the camera out to rural clinics, taking medicine outside the walls of the hospital. The camera will go with them. They will document these images, and these images will mean all sorts of things. They'll be sent back to the United States for churches and for families. They will also be circulated with Chinese colleagues and families and people they work with in China. This is not a one-directional type of missionaries taking things and sending them other places. This is an embeddedness of what it means to live and be local in China. And the camera will do this. It will do these things. And the Hankies will serve this hospital, the only Western hospital in an area of approximately 4 million people, for the next decade and a half as part of their experiences in China. And you can see here in these particular images that you have not only the documentation of medical work or patients being brought to the hospital, different types of social contact and community contact, but you also see here that the Hankies are trying to get around the limitations of technology. They only have black and white film. There is no color film at this time available, easily available to them. So they're even having these photographs hand painted by Chinese photo developers in Beijing after they've been developed to capture reality, whether it means to add blue to the clothing that these community members are wearing, or to tint the red dust of this North Chinese province actually red or yellow in the ground. This is a way of navigating limitations in technology that parallels the way that you might navigate living in a new place and becoming embedded in that place. Now, the Hankies will serve this hospital. Remember this photograph. It will return later on in this talk, but this will be their experience for years and years to come, and will have all sorts of particular ways of intersection with images and experience that I write about in my book. But just jump forward quickly again to give a sense of the detective work and what happens behind the scenes in this particular history. The Hankies don't just, kind of stay in their particular visual practice or their particular experience. This particular image has impact for me because of what it says in various ways and also surprises, so to speak, for this history. This is an American Presbyterian mission meeting. Everyone's dressed in their Sunday best sometime in North China, 1932, 1933. It's a gathering of all the missionaries in that particular conference in North China, in the province of Hebei. And something that stands out in this image is not just the fact that these are all Americans kind of dressed in their Sunday best in China. And if I didn't tell you this was China, you might think this was somewhere in Illinois or in California. What stands out in this image is the box that Harold Hankey is holding. And you might look at that and you think, that's this world's smallest briefcase. Well, it's not really. That box had a particular life. It had a particular trajectory. That box actually started in a church, actually started with a decision in a church in New York, the Rye Presbyterian Church. That photograph on the right-hand side is a new photograph that I took in 2017 when I was doing research there. And that church, in 1930, right before Christmas, had a prayer meeting and a administrative meeting where the leadership of the church and the community of the church resolved that they would take up a collection to purchase a motion picture camera for Dr. Hankey, missionary in China, that he's going to make not just still photographs, and not just him, but Jesse May and other members of their community, both men and women, are going to make movies. And this is a box that once you see, you cannot unsee, because this movie camera, which was built in Rochester, New York by Eastman Kodak, a 16mm Cine-Kodak Model B spring-wound movie camera, say that 10 times fast, was shipped all the way from New York after being purchased by the collection of this church. And by the way, this is in the middle of the Great Depression. That camera cost $150, which translates to approximately almost $2,000 in 2024 money. That a church collected money in the midst of the Great Depression to purchase a movie camera shipped all the way from New York, all the way to China, where it starts showing up in the background of particular family photographs. But family photographs now include two children, Robert Hankey and Richard Hankey. And that, again, once you see the box, you cannot unsee the box, because that is that movie camera. And with that movie camera, the Hankies will add another level of mediation, another type of in-betweenness. They will make, by the time they leave China in 1949, they will have shot 6,400 feet of motion picture film using that camera. And that camera will go on to become this type of connective device between worlds, and also between what it means to be a modern missionary, not just someone who is a kind of Bible thumper or a conservative who is closed-minded. Again, put aside your stereotypes here. There are missionaries, and these were missionaries, who were thinking as global citizens in the way that they were even making films to address what it meant to both save souls and heal bodies. Films divided between the work of the church and the work of the hospital. Films that depict everyday life, films that are part of their embeddedness in a local community. These will all be part of their mediation and their in-betweenness. And they will create 6,400 feet of this film using this movie camera, which I was able to work with in my research later on, that still exists. And this camera will create images again that bridge worlds, that show embeddedness in communities. And again, thinking about what these experiences will mean, not just for the Hankies, but also for the Chinese communities in which they live. This is not just, again, an outside imposition. This is a local embeddedness. And the films that we see here, and actually we're going to watch one right now together, we'll watch this particular film shot by the Hankies, digitized by me a couple of years ago in 1080p high resolution. And hopefully you can see this clearly on your screen, bringing us into the space of a mission that is connected to both local and global community. People leaving the church on a Sunday afternoon after the service, men and women donating, collecting tithes here, giving, contributing to their community, both in financial ways as well as spiritual and cultural ways. And this particular film will capture all segments of society. You'll see in the back an American missionary. We actually freeze frame the board at some point and actually realize that there's an announcement set on the board. There's Bible study and there's meals and there's fellowship. Women dressed in both traditional as well as this kind of hybrid modern dress, women with bound feet from the earlier parts of Chinese history, and then women with unbound feet, modern women taking ownership, being part of this community of Chinese Christians, all in just the first couple minutes of this film. What we are seeing is the ability of a device and a group of people who are involved in mediation, what it means to translate modern experience, what it means to think around different boundaries, what it means for what you just saw there, that kid does not have a tithe, please move along, and then patients from the hospital showing up. This is a connection of community, young and old, Western and Chinese, and lighthearted moments as well as serious moments, including a railing, a brick railing, worn smooth by the bodies of young children using it as a slide in this moment, in this particular film. I loved it, and I can go on and on about this particular movie, but it is almost like time travel. It is almost like seeing a window onto an experience in a world that we would not otherwise be able to see if it were not for the space of the mission of the Hankies, of the Chinese community, and also of this movie camera. I'll stop here. Now, the movie camera will go. It will go places. It will also go and move through space and time, as do the Hanky family. The Hankies will move to Beijing in the post-war era after 1946. And in Beijing, they will load their movie camera with new types of technologies, color film. They will finally be able to actually capture the reality of their experience in images using Kodachrome in the late 1940s. And this particular film will also echo what it means to have your experience changed. When worlds change around you, when what it means to be embedded in a space and a place is essentially removed from you, and another type of history starts. And this is visible in this color film that they're making in 48 and 49, because literally the last fragment of color film that the Hankies, and specifically Harold Hanke, makes in China is this image. A new China on the rise after 1949, that the portraits are hung up on Tiananmen Square and other parts of government buildings are no longer the same, that there is something new on the surface that will end the Hankies' time in China, and that is the arrival of the People's Republic of China within a year After that, 49, 50, many American and foreign missionaries and foreign personnel are expelled from China due to political reasons and also pressure on religious groups. And this last shot of this color film, I feel, is very emblematic of what it means for the Hankies to kind of look back at China and realize that our world has changed, our experience has changed, the communities that we are part of will now be divorced from us as time moves forward. But that doesn't mean, however, that this is just an American story or this is just a missionary story, because there are other materials that connect to that experience. Photograph albums, now in the city of Wuhan. Photograph albums that are filled with different types of encounters and mediation and in-betweenness. What it means for, in this particular photograph album, a young Chinese student to go and undertake his graduate studies at a place called, in the upper left-hand corner, Cornell University in 1939. What it means for that young Chinese engineering student to work with works progress administration teams, building radio towers, conducting surveying, applying civil engineering techniques to both American development at the end of the Great Depression, as well as the development of modern China, where he will take these experiences and techniques and education back to his home place in China. That young engineering student will go on to serve universities that will be retreating from the Japanese military as the Japanese invasion of China is underway in 1937 through 1945. He will join universities that are now replanting themselves in China's southwest, away from the Japanese invasion. He will be taking pictures with a new camera, these pictures, of Chongqing and other areas where the nationalist government has retreated during the Second World War. And after the war, this young civil engineering and surveying student, now a professor, will go and go back with these universities to their former homes in North China. And as many things go, these photographs and this particular album is not just a documentation of education or of professional life or of even wartime experience. It's a documentation of personal relationships. And at one point, as many of you know from your own photograph albums, a young person appears that you are particularly connected to. A young woman, in this case, the girlfriend of this young professor, starts showing up in the photographs of this album. And this young woman is a Chinese Christian nurse who will fall in love with each other, and they will eventually get married. And her photographs show up in the pages of this album, including the photographs of group of people you've just seen earlier in this talk, the Henke family. This nurse, Liu Zhi, her new husband, Li Qinghai, had a special relationship with the Henkes. Liu Zhi herself had been trained in the American Presbyterian hospital in Shunde before the war. Actually, when the war started, she was a refugee who fled to the hospital with her family. The Henkes took her in. They essentially gave her her first nursing training, and she started her medical career because of this relationship with the Henkes, as well as their shared Christian faith. In 1948, she will be engaged to Li Qinghai, the young professor, who was not a Christian. In fact, her own family opposed this marriage, saying, you shouldn't get married to someone who's not a Christian. And it actually was the Henkes who sponsored her marriage, saying, it's okay. Do you love this man? We will support you regardless. A very interesting and generously Christian way of seeing this connection across time and across culture. Liu Zhi and Li Qinghai will have their wedding reception held in the house of the Henkes in Beijing, then called Beiping, in 1948. And Li Qinghai will take these photographs of the Henkes and of Liu Zhi in that wedding reception, dressed in their best, celebrating this marriage, a marriage that will last for decades after that, a friendship that will last for decades after that. And I had the privilege of not just finding these photographs, but also realizing that these photographs connected to others across the Pacific. That Liu Ju and Li Qinghai, actually two of their wedding photographs, ended up on the other side of the Pacific in the Henke's family photo album. And because of various connections, and the connections of these images and these experiences, I was able to actually meet Liu Ju in May of 2011 and to interview her and to think about what it meant for memory and oral histories to map onto images that connect across space, across time, across the Pacific. And here is where, I want to say that these particular images, they're not silent. They're connected to experience, they're connected to memory. Liu Ju, when I met her in 2011, was already at that time 93, 94 years old. She was suffering from dementia, and yet when I spoke to her and I showed her, and she actually showed me images that she had collected, that photo album that you just saw earlier, and I showed her pictures of the Henke's, immediately memories came back. Immediately she started talking about what it meant to be a friend of these people. And she called them my family members. She called them more than just friends. They were like my family. And these memories were in many ways anchored by, galvanized by, projected onto images. Even in the haze of dementia, these photographs and these experiences came back to the surface. I also, on that particular trip, was able to travel to the Henke's former church and mission station in North China. And there's a reason why I wanted you to think about a particular image earlier, is because when I went there and I was interviewing former Chinese Christians and personnel who knew the Henke's and others who were in China in the 1930s, they said to me, well, that was a great interview. Thank you very much. Let's go to the next door restaurant to have lunch. And I went to the next door restaurant and I gasped as I turned the corner and saw the restaurant, because that restaurant wasn't just a restaurant before. And thanks to photographs, I realized that that was actually the old hospital. And we, in the space of that interview, after with the lunch, sat in what must have been the outpatient ward of the former Presbyterian hospital in Xingtai in Shunde, now called the Great Wall Gourmet Restaurant, and had lunch with people that I was very, very wowed by, as well as the space in which we were sitting. Like I said before, photographs don't stay places. They move through space and time. Space and time move around them. And this was a particularly surprising experience of what it meant to connect the image and the space and the experience of conducting oral history collection. To kind of bookend all of this, there was an image that I was not able to recover in Liu Ju's album, in Li Qinghai's album. She talked about her experience as a young nurse in China. And for some reason or another, there was no images of her as a young nurse. However, when I was conducting research in the Henke family collection, shortly after I went to China and met Liu Ju, I found a photograph in their scrapbook labeled Student Nurses that actually depicts, in 1937, the group of trainee nurses that Liu Ju was part of. And you can see her sitting in the front row at the far left-hand side as a young nurse, a refugee who had fled the devastation of the Second Sino-Japanese War and had survived in the protection of this mission, who was starting her career as a nurse. I made a copy photograph of this image. I emailed it to her son, Liu Ju's son in Wuhan, where she was living at the time. And he told me that she was thrilled to see this image. About 2 weeks, a little bit over 2 weeks after I sent this image to her, I received an email from her son, and he told me my mother has passed away, and we were all very sad. We are grieving her now. We're remembering her life. She's passed away at the age of 94. And yet, when she saw this photograph, when you sent it to us, she remembered every single one of the names of all of the young women sitting next to her in that mission compound on that day in 1937. And I want to think about that because that is how my book begins. That is just the tip of the iceberg. That is just the beginning of a connection between images of two albums on either side of the Pacific, one in what was then California, one was in California, and one in Wuhan, connecting two lives and two groups of lives across the Pacific. And that particular memory, that experience, has all sorts of resonances because it has personal resonances for me, as well as the talk that you are all now part of this morning and this afternoon. That's because 15 years ago, this guy on the right-hand side of the screen was an administrative assistant at a place that you all know, the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum. I was an undergraduate at the University of California, San Diego, UCSD, and in my senior year, I worked at the museum as an administrative assistant. In fact, I was sitting where Jacinta and Muting are actually sitting right now, and I was cataloging artifacts. I was helping with museum activities. I loved it. It was my first foray into what it meant to present history to the public and to a community that was dear to me. I was also photographer for the museum, so I took that picture cataloging these materials for an exhibit. I also took this picture of people you may recognize who will appear shortly after I finish talking today. We've got Lily, we've got Alex, and we have Michael Yee. And again, just putting that out there, this is a very special moment for me because it was also at this museum when I was working at the front desk one morning in 2009, that a gentleman walked through the doors and wanted to see Alex. And he said, I have all these artifacts I'd like to donate to the museum. Can I talk to the director? And me being a young undergrad said, of course, let me show you the way to the director. And I brought Alex over and we talked and I followed this gentleman around and I asked him, how did you get these materials? How did you collect all these things like snuff bottles and paintings? Are you a professor? Are you a collector? Are you an artist? Oh, no, I'm not. I'm the son of Presbyterian missionaries. I was born in China in 1934. Really, I said. Well, what, can you tell me more? It turned out that the gentleman I had met was in fact Richard Henke. I was blown away by what he was sharing with his experiences and his materials. And I asked him, because I had just finished as an undergrad at UC San Diego, I just finished an award-winning honors thesis on Western photographers in wartime China. So I asked him, do you have any photos? Oh my goodness, he said, I've got hundreds of photos. Really? I said, can I see them? Of course. And by the way, we also have movies from China in the 1930s. And that was literally the beginning of all of my research. That everything you have heard about today began with the San Diego Chinese Historical Museum. And that moment in 2009, when I got to meet Richard Henke and thereafter his wife, Sophie Henke, and became a dear friend and a research contact for them for many years. And it was just a wonderful experience. Richard Henke later became a trustee of the museum. And for myself, at least, I went on from UC San Diego to another place where I was able to continue my research using the materials that Dr. Henke provided for me. Here, he is that young toddler sitting on his mother's knee with that box, with that movie camera in the background in the mid-1930s. And there he is again in 2013, screening the same films from that movie camera for me in his home in California. it was the most incredible moment of my research. And I've had so many others since then, but this will always stay with me as one of those moments of surprise, of mediation, of in-betweenness. And I went from there to my graduate program at the University of Michigan, where I got my doctorate in history in 2017. Again, because of the support of other people like my wife and my two kids who are there, showing, again, this is my graduation photo. There's all sorts of personal experiences bound up in this connection. And yet, this entire time, the museum and the hankies were never far away from what I was thinking about. Because when I graduated with my doctorate in 2017, Richard Hankey said, I have a particular graduation present for you. I would like to give you that movie camera, which I am now holding on the screen. If you're looking at my little portrait icon, I have the camera right here in my office, right here today, and it still works. Can't see you all, but I'm trying to basically make a movie of you all. You just heard the sound of that movie camera running, the sound that the hankies heard as they were filming, the sound that the Chinese communities in front of the camera and participating in those movies heard. And it is a sound and a material and a device that has great personal meaning for me and for my research and for what I've shared today. My research continues to take me in new directions, as does my family. That's my daughter, who is actually hosting, in this photograph, a group of another American missionary children, children who grew up in China, who came to the University of Michigan in 2017 for a conference that I organized. And my daughter Jane was an amazing host in taking all of these former missionary children on this wonderful walk around the University of Michigan campus. My work is taking me in new directions, including what it means to examine other family photographs from the Cold War in Taiwan, in Thailand, and in Trans-Pacific connections, and what it means to look at these types of mediation beyond simply the missionary enterprise, beyond China before 1949, but to Taiwan and other parts of East and Southeast Asia in the years after that moment, in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and what it means to think about, again, mediation, in-betweenness, all these materials of images, oral histories, and memories that connect across space and across time. My next book that I'm currently working on, I'll be conducting research at University of Michigan, as well as Boston College, Harvard University, Stanford University, hopefully also back to my alma mater of UC San Diego. I'll be collecting materials for that next book right now, and I'm working on it. The title is Bamboo Wireless, Mediating the Cold War in Asia. But again, everything I've shared today and these experiences of being connected across space and time in images, in memory, in oral histories, really are not just a part of my previous book, Developing Mission, but they are tremendously a part of the museum. They are a part of what you have heard of today. And I'm grateful and very thankful that I had the opportunity today to share with you those frames and voices that cross the Pacific with all of you today. And you are now all part of this history as well. Thank you.
Well, Dr. Ho, I don't know what to say. You've hooked me, by the way, and I'm interested in every aspect of this talk, both in the personal aspect of how a chance meeting changes lives, and probably each one of us is thinking the very same thing. We're reviewing our own lives and we're remembering a certain day or time that changed our trajectory in a dramatic way, which is an amazing thing. The photography aspect is just amazing. We're thinking about how photography validates history. And, people say there's all the deniers. People say, oh, that never happened, were there really atrocities in Manchuria? And then you say, I've got movies. And you say, I've got movies to document these things. And you think about memory, and memory tends to be quite different. And then you think about how people's lives are changed, that the act of taking the movies alters your experience. And you've seen people uh, who go on a vacation and are endlessly snapping pictures. They have actually a different experience on that vacation than other people who are not taking pictures. They have quite a different feeling at the end, and it's the whole thing. This is remarkable food for thought. I've just loved every aspect of your presentation. And I think that what we'll do now is we'll have uh, Michael Yee talk. And then I'm thinking also about propaganda. You're thinking about how movies, you think about Leni Riefenstahl, the Nazi filmmaker with Triumph of the Will, and movies can alter people's perceptions of life. And it's all very thought-provoking. I just loved your presentation. So, Michael, and why don't we have you give your thoughts and have a discussion of Dr. Ho's presentation. And then after that, if we have time, we'll leave it open to questions from the audience.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Um, Joseph, I've seen your presentation before in different stages, and I really marveled at the depth that your research, required, and your love for that research. So I'll try to be brief, and since I'm responding to your presentation, a lot of these thoughts are a bit, are separate and independent, but I want to include them. So, first of all, you close with your note about meeting Richard Henke, and that really struck me in connecting with the Chinese Historical Museum of such the value of an organization like this. And you can educate adults, you can educate children, you can inspire people through art, culture, and history, and you can also inspire future generations. So for you, it's so rewarding to see that the museum was able to have that pivotal point in your trajectory, and how your work has then will enable others to really build on that. So for me, as a second career public historian, I used to teach at Cal State San Marcos, but I'm moving over to San Diego Miramar College so I can focus on the history aspect. And as I was preparing for my class this semester, I was reminded to emphasize the importance of thinking like a historian. There is a Khan Academy video that's just about 9 minutes that really highlights what thinking like a historian is and why it's important in this day and age with 3 main elements. Google that, but really the first one is being a storyteller. And so you can dive into the detailed information, those primary sources, looking at notes, looking and interpreting. And that's what you've done so brilliantly in your book here, Developing Mission, which is what I'm going to be diving into a little bit more. There's also elements about then the scientific process of developing a hypothesis and then looking for the evidence to support that. And we think about history and science being completely separate, and they were really, elements of the same thing, where in today's age of finding information on the internet, but what's the source of it? Is this reliable? And being skeptical of looking at that is so important. And that's another element of thinking like a historian. And then a third element is the legal aspect in terms of making an argument and looking for the evidence as well. And again, we're here at that. You've developed an expertise in terms of evaluating and analyzing, still photography as well as moving photography. So I do want to highlight, kind of as a separate point then, that as part of your presentation, you allowed us and helped educate us to take a look at a historic photograph or any photograph and really, you know, take a look and analyze and look at the subtle nuances of that photograph, and a lot more can actually be revealed from that. So you've given us that wonderful perspective, and I like to think that you've highlighted that appreciation. I did want to then say you talked about Harold and Jessie May's work with the video camera, the Cine Kodak film camera. And so when I delved into the book, your storytelling aspect really revealed saying, all right, what the evidence showed was that Jessie May was actually taking a lot of notes in response to the materials, and she was oftentimes not in front of the camera. So there's an interpretation and an argument that, well, was Jessie May then really a driving force behind these videos, film, and that's an element of women's history that, you know, oftentimes women get overlooked. So here you're making that case that she was actually a driving force, and you know, I love that experience. Continuing with the book, it's an enjoyable book. You know, I'm highlighting chapter 3. It's also it's a book that I think requires, you know, your attention. So it's not something that you can consume just really quickly. Professor Ho has written this to really appeal to all levels, and but it is something that will require your full attention to really appreciate the eloquent manner that he describes a number of these different elements. And you heard his eloquent speech in talking about the different high-level interpretations for the work that he's done here. I also want to highlight, and this actually connects with the museum, the transnational aspect of this particular book and his research. And so we talk about the United States of America being a nation of immigrants. And a lot of times history focuses on the American experience or the Chinese experience. Well, what Professor Ho has done is he's tied these two together and really shown that you know, history is across these borders. Professor Ho really looked at the trans-Pacific element, but we're talking about, in the historical framework, transnationalism is a increasingly important field, and there's more people who are actually able to do that kind of work. If you are familiar with only one single culture, then that is much more difficult. But as a nation of immigrants, we are really, you know, rapidly, you know, building that expertise for further exploration. In terms of the further exploration, I want to highlight that, you know, the photos, the research that Professor Ho did, you know, has revealed it with a focus on the missionary perspectives, but yet photographs and moving images from the 1930s through the 1940s, that's irreplaceable resource that, now that he has documented that these sources are available, other historians or other people interested in history, they know where to look, and they can go to his sources. And so Professor Ho is documenting what his sources are. He's making those arguments, but then he makes it available so that other people can do further work and build on either his work, or they can develop their new arguments. Another thought is that this is also, you know, a work by the history of the people. So Professor Ho, you know, talked about it as ground level. Well, within the historical profession, you know, there's also emphasis. We are not so much only focused on the great individuals, but we're focused on the history of the people. So even in your own families, you know, you have parents and grandparents and great-grandparents who, you know, didn't invent something miraculous, but they were part of building something. whether they're building their families or building a community, whether it's infrastructure. So many times, we kind of underappreciate what the work that is done by the people. And so these images, both moving and still, offer that. I would like to then, really, I guess I'll highlight the photo that you shared going back. So thank you, Joseph, for including, Dr. Lily Chang, founding executive director Alexander Chuang, and acknowledging his wife Agnes. So pivotal. But then, these early leaders. So I was so privileged to be a part of that. Recognizing founders such as Dorothy Hom and Sally Wong Avery as the first president of the Chinese Historical Society of Greater San Diego and Baja California, Tom Hom, the second president, all those amazing individuals. I was the youngster in the group, and that was a nice memory. So thank you so much. And really, that is my conclusion and just summary of some of these amazing ideas that you presented. I want to leave time for questions. So thank you for this opportunity to share. I do want to then highlight now the present, that one of my activities is being involved in the National Council on Public History, and I'm going to put into the chat. I'm chair of a working group called Asian American Pacific Islander Public History for the National Council on Public History. It's a evolving group, and we're just looking to see public history, involves, making history work in the world, extending beyond an academic scenario scope. So here is just where we're meeting. Please take a look at that. At that link, and see if you're interested in learning more about the work that's happening. Then part 2 on September 1, I believe I'm confirmed to lead the tour. I'm inviting members of my class to attend for the Asian Pacific Historic District walking tour. I will probably also try to do October as well, so that students can attend, but I wanted to at least extend the invitation. I'm impressed by the primary guide, Amy, and her personal experiences with the tour, and then I'll be able to give my spin and background on that September 1st, and then again on the first Sunday of October. So look forward to, if you're interested in coming down, supporting the museum and learning more about the Asian Pacific Historic District, love to see you. So again, thank you.
Okay. Well, Michael, thank you for your comments, and I'll certainly underline the fun of going on the tour. Joseph, I want to ask you a question. Richard Henke the son, how connected was he to his dad and mom's work? Did he speak Chinese? Did he see all these films and photos as junk in the basement that he was trying to get rid of, or did he appreciate the value of it? I was just curious what his personal take was.
Thank you, Dr. Stein, and thank you, Professor Yee, for that set of really engaging and thoughtful comments. I'll jump in with a couple of thoughts here, and I'll try to also respond to some of the questions coming in the chat box. So to first start with Dr. Stein, your comment or question, Dr. Henke was so invested in this history. But it was really interesting because he had such memories and just interest in both his parents as well as China and Chinese history. The reason why he became a trustee of the museum, and also the reason why he was making that material available to me, was because he had that strong personal interest. At the same time, he also gave me free rein to analyze the materials as a historian and also as a community member. Because oftentimes you have this tricky balance between people want to tell their stories and then they overwhelm the stories with their own perspectives or what they want the story to be like. And on the other hand, you have what you just mentioned there, where people don't care. Their photos are dumped in a box. They're in a basement somewhere. They're not something people, want to care about. And Dr. Henke was one of these really special people who was right in the middle. He cared for the material, he cared for the history, and then he gave me the freedom to write and analyze and really live in this history as part of that experience. And I would say that if all of you out there listening about to this talk, if you want to think about being that balance too, in sharing your materials, but also knowing that they're special to you and how you might bridge the gaps between stuff you have and the histories you're interested in, and then allowing others to be part of that history, please do so. In terms of Professor Yee's comments here, there's lots of things to think about in terms of what you shared here. And I think something you flagged was the different voices and different materials that are part of this history, whether it's women's voices or technologies or photographs. And I would urge everyone who's listening today to, and I already see them in the comments here, to think about the different voices that are parts of your histories and the materials you're interested in as well. Because we all know that every single history that we are part of has those voices and has those materials. I would also emphasize for everyone here, and before we move on to questions, I see hands up coming from Jack, Meng, and others, is that we often have this feeling that family history is not like real history, that family history is family history and history is history. They're the same thing. I feel like family history is just as important for thinking about history more broadly, just as Professor Yee mentioned, the history of the people. Because history is not just about dates and facts. It's not just about the people who won or the people who are the big picture. It's about all voices and all perspectives. So I'm seeing questions pop up here. I'm happy to, and please reach out to me if you cannot, directly have a response today. I know there's a lot, I could go on, but I would love to be in touch with every single person who's put a comment in the chat. I'll answer one question and I'll turn over to Jack in just a moment. So one of the first questions.
Sorry, before you do that, Joseph.
Yeah.
You brought back such fond memories of our multiple meetings at San Diego Chinese Historical Museum. What I want to say to you is that Dr. Henke was such a dear, dear friend. And I call him my Xingtai baby because he was born in Xingtai, also known as Shunde. I took the time to visit Xingtai during a trip to China, just to look at his birthplace. May I know if you are in touch with him and his family at this moment?
Thank you for asking, Dr. Cheng. I am sorry to say that Richard Henke passed away last year. He passed away in 2023. I was in touch, I'm still in touch with his family now. And they're very dear friends of mine. And I also had the same experience of going to Xingtai and seeing the hospital and interviewing people. And I'm pretty sure you'll find a lot of connection in the book as well as your own experience. So thank you for that comment. I do want to answer a couple questions here in the chat and then turn over to Jack, who's had his hand up and very patiently waiting. So thank you, Jack, and thank you, Dr. Cheng. So the first question I'll very quickly answer to is the question of fragile photographs. And I've alluded to this, family photographs sitting in closets and basements and garages. Most archivists will tell you, and I'm not a professional archivist, but I do collect material, is that the enemies of material tend to be heat, light, and humidity. So if you have material that is in a fragile condition, make sure you put that material in a place that is cool, that is dry, and that is away from light. And if possible, store it in new boxes that have archival safe plastics, and archival acid-free paper is always good. But certainly, if for any of you out there who are interested in preserving your family materials, talk to the museum staff, also talk to me. I'm happy to give more tips and pointers on how to do that. But it is also really good to digitize them if possible, but to think about the fact that these materials, you may be the only person in the world right now who knows about them. Find a way to make them accessible to others. I actually have an entire digital collection that I put together with all of my material, thousands of photos, hours of film that I can send to all of you after the talk for you to peruse, and it pairs with my book. But there is a real, keep everything together. That's the last thing. Keep it all together. Don't throw anything away. So some of you are thinking about stuff you have. Well, I give you full reign to not throw it away. Save it, preserve it, digitize it, and then make it visible. I'd love to talk with other people right now, but right now let's go with Jack, and then I will answer Jinya's question about missionaries.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. Can you hear me now?
Perfectly.
Thank you. Okay. Your presentation is very, very good. I really enjoyed it. You have led us back into China in the 30th or 40th of last century. And of course, you know, those photos, those movies are worth the 1,000 words. And this, therefore, it gives me an idea. This is something that I'm thinking of. Well, the Sino-China War that lasted from somebody called it 1931. Some people say it's 1937 through 1945. So for such a long period, the Chinese people, how many Chinese people had cameras? Almost nobody, right? And all those photos of the atrocity, of the crimes the Japanese Royal Armies they committed were recorded by their own reporters, photographers, or the American priest, Mr. McKay, right? Other than that, who else had the evidence? So therefore, it dawned on me that Iris Chan, when she was writing the book of the Rape of Nine King, she tried very hard, went to China to collect information, but there was not enough solid information. And people still are accusing her to using fake stories or something, right? So therefore, this is my question. My question is, without the solid evidence, what can we do with the situation to prove the true history records? And another thing, I'm really proud that our museum and you has such long affiliation together.
Thank you, Jack. That was an excellent set of comments, and thank you for that very encouraging note at the end, too. So I'll respond very quickly. It is actually surprising that a good number of Chinese people did, in fact, have cameras in the 1930s, also 1940s. Photography was actually a lot more democratic than we tend to think of it. You are correct, however, that there is not a lot of documentation from specific Chinese sources on military atrocities. And that, of course, is due to the fact that there was real danger in making images under those circumstances. If you read my book, Chapter 4 is completely about wartime photography by missionaries and also by Chinese individuals who tried really hard to bring out the news that these atrocities were taking place. But interestingly, the missionaries who made those images, like McGee, like you mentioned, which I write about in Chapter 4, were doing that because they wanted to stop the war, not hate the Japanese. They made a real distinction to say that we are trying to stop the war, not to discriminate against Japanese people. It's the Japanese military who are doing these horrible things that we must stop. So you're right, a lot of these images exist in missionary archives, in missionary collections, because the Chinese could not make those images, not because they didn't have cameras, but rather because they couldn't use them for fear of their own lives. That does not mean that missionary images are only American or only Western. They are just as much a part of Chinese history as they are of Trans-Pacific history. So I would say that's I also worked with the same files that Iris Chang worked with. They are all now at Yale Divinity School, that photograph I put up earlier. But it really is a complicated and traumatic history that I write about in the 4th chapter of my book. And I want to again, emphasize that this is a multinational history that has all of these other experiences embedded inside of it. In terms of other questions, I can just go through them quickly, so I want to make sure we have enough time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hall. One question. Are you in Ann Arbor?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Thank you.
Dr. Ho, I think we're pretty much coming to the end. Maybe one more question, and then we ask the principals to stay on for a short debriefing. Either you can see it yourself, Dr. Ho, or Elizabeth
Mhm.
can go through the chat and get you one more question.
Well, if you don't mind, I will first just off say anyone who's put a question in the chat or anyone who hasn't had a chance to put a question in the chat, please email me. Please be in touch with me. I'm going to put my email now in the chat box itself so that you can reach out to me. This is also my website, which has more information on my research, writing, and publication. If you want to take a screenshot, make a copy of this,